Pues por muchos años muchas personas me han estado cuestionando respecto a mis credenciales, sobre todo cuando menciono que estuve trabajando con gente de la CIA, el FBI, la DEA, entre otras dependencias de gobierno, tanto en Estados Unidos como en otros países. Para aquellos que no lo saben, bueno, actualmente ya estoy más bien como un asesor de algunas dependencias, entonces ya puedo hablar acerca del tema de manera abierta. En esta ocasión voy a entrevistar a un compañero de bando que estuvo trabajando de cerca con el exdirector de la CIA y también con el Departamento de Seguridad de Estados Unidos. Estuvo a cargo de gran parte de la seguridad en Irak y en Afganistán. Y también hablaremos acerca del impacto de bando en todas estas dependencias. No nada más en Estados Unidos, también hay dependencias en Francia y en otros países que practican bando como tal. Y de otras cosas muy muy interesantes acerca de temas de guerra, de inteligencia. Entonces, a partir de ahora vamos a hablar un poco más acerca de ese tipo de temas. Voy a estar entrevistando a otras personas y haciendo algunos videos acerca de todo esto. Así que espero que les guste, disfrútenlo. Lamentablemente el video está con muy mal audio y pues no se ve muy bien debido a que me pidió Curtis, que así se llama, Sayaji Curtis Jayjohn, que lo hiciéramos por medio de WhatsApp. Entonces también no había muy buena señal y de hecho es la segunda ocasión que lo entrevisto debido a que en la primera ocasión también hubo muchos errores. No sé si sea a propósito por él y no me haya dicho, no sé si sea por la zona en la que se encuentra. Sin embargo, si están interesados en saber más acerca de este tipo de temas, me pueden buscar en Instagram para pues tomar clases directamente conmigo o platicar acerca de todo este tipo de temas. Que de hecho en la última pregunta que le hice en la entrevista anterior que no salió y en esta, tiene que ver con objetos voladores no identificados y todo eso, que es un tema bastante interesante, donde nos platica pues a grandes rasgos cuál es su opinión, pero hay mucho más acerca del tema y si están interesados en saber un poco más, pues igual háganme llegar sus comentarios y pues podemos platicar y empezar a compartir algunas evidencias. Sin más, disfruten el video y los leo en los comentarios. No se olviden de suscribirse, comentar, compartir, darle like y ponerle la campanita para que les lleguen los videos. Necesito mucho apoyo, estoy teniendo más apoyo en TikTok, apenas estoy empezando por allá y ya hay más apoyo, así que tratemos de darle más fuerza aquí a YouTube. Y pues visítenme en mi Instagram, que es en donde más contesto los mensajes de todos. Así que pues vaya, eso es todo y lamento que la calidad del video no sea la esperada, pero lo van a disfrutar.
Hola amigos de Banjet, espero se encuentren todos muy bien. En esta ocasión me encuentro con un miembro muy importante de Bando. Su nombre es Curtis Jayjohn. Es una persona muy destacada también en el ámbito de la seguridad nacional en Estados Unidos. Y bueno, nos va a platicar un poquito de su trayectoria y de cómo Bando impactó en diferentes dependencias de gobierno de alto nivel. Así que lo voy a estar traduciendo cada vez que él platique en inglés, voy a estar traduciendo parte por parte. Okay, hello everybody, welcome to Banjet. Right now I have Curtis Jayjohn with me. He is one of the greatest Bando practitioners I know, and also he has an incredible background in security, national security. So I will be translating everything he said as we start chatting. So my English is not the best, but I will do my best. So thank you, Sayaji, to have me. It's amazing to have the opportunity to talk to you again.
No problem. Enjoy it.
Thank you. Okay, well, so my first question would be, can you tell us a little bit of your background in Bando and in your job in general? Le estoy preguntando si nos puede traducir o nos puede platicar un poco acerca de su trayectoria en seguridad nacional y en Bando.
Well, I've been practicing Bando since the 90s, so that'd be about 30 years. I've been involved in martial arts since the mid to late 60s. I'm a lot older than I look. So, I was introduced to Bando through Sayachi Chet Buffington because he was a Goju-Ryu master, and my first black belt was in Goju-Ryu. Goju-Ryu is, of course, Okinawan karate, and also in Japan it's very prevalent. So I trained Goju for about 8 or 10 years more than Bando, so probably close to 40, 45 years.
I know that you have an amazing background in security. As I told you before, there is a picture of you with the ex-CIA director, and also you had the opportunity to work in the Middle East. So can you tell us a little bit of that, and also if Bando helped you doing that, or, well, tell us the story, the whole story.
Originally, my security, I was a law enforcement officer, the chief of police, prior to getting into nuclear security, where I was part of a protective force for the government, protecting weapons grade uranium from bombs. So a lot of training, a lot of highly skilled personnel, of course, high-level security clearances. And I did that for about 17 years. And I got injured and I had to go back to law enforcement and teaching because I could no longer pass the requirements to maintain that position. It was like being on a SWAT team or being on a SEAL team. Although it was paramilitary, it was a very highly skilled group of ex-military and law enforcement officers.
Ok, lo que nos platica ahora es de que primero trabajó como policía y tuvo la oportunidad después de volverse parte de la seguridad de alto rango porque protegía uranio y diferentes sustancias para armas nucleares y todo eso. Y bueno, pues la verdad es que su currículum es impresionante. Ya después lo voy a compartir para que, ya que él está retirado, lo podemos platicar y compartir de manera pública. I'm sorry to be as... To repeat that, but can you tell us a little bit of General Petraeus and your relationship and how you to meet or whatever? Yeah.
Well, General Petraeus and General Casey were the head of the armed forces in Iraq and Afghanistan, and they were leapfrogs. Casey would go to Afghanistan for a year or 2 years, I think it was 2 years, and then they flip-flop and Petraeus would come in. You had to be at least a third brigadier or maybe general to really work at that. Petraeus, when I met him, was a fourth general. Originally, when Casey was there, they both worked in at the Joint Military Group there and command staff. So Petraeus, after he from the military, and he had a glorious career, he was recruited by the Obama administration to take over the CIA, which he did for several years.
Ok, lo que nos platica es de que conoció al general de la CIA, el exdirector de la CIA, Petraeus, y también al general Casey. Ellos estaban encargados de la seguridad en Irak y en Afganistán. Y bueno, pues estuvieron mucho tiempo en el rango y pues así fue como tuvo la oportunidad de conocerlos, ya que él estuvo en Medio Oriente también trabajando con ellos. Ok, so also I would like you to tell us a little bit of the background of some of the most known martial artists inside Bando. Like, for example, I remember that you mentioned Bob Maxwell, a Secret Service agent, ex-Secret Service, and also I know that there are some other agents or government officials within the Bando organizations. Le estoy preguntando si hay algún otro miembro, por ejemplo, hay una persona muy importante en Bando que trabajó para el servicio secreto y también hay otras personas de diferentes dependencias y bueno, pues debido a su experiencia que nos platicara un poquito acerca de ellos y su relación con Bando.
Bando has several high-level government officials or former high-level government officials in the Secret Service. Some of them work for Blackwater. I worked for the U.S. State Department and also the Department of Justice as a contractor at one time. You had Al Cook, who was a deputy sheriff and a training officer for the Franklin County Sheriff's Department, which was a capital. So it was the largest one in the state of Ohio. So very high trained, very skilled personnel there.
Ok, nos comenta, nos afirma que sí, precisamente hay personas de mando que son parte del Blackwater, que son sheriffs, que son policías, que son miembros de diferentes agencias, como el Servicio Secreto, como el Departamento de Justicia, como el Departamento de Seguridad Nacional, etcétera, etcétera. And well, the reason of this is because Bando tends to help the military and the special forces, the law enforcement and all that, right?
Bando, of course, is well over 1,000 years old, and the practitioners developed the system in Southeast Asia from the Chinese, and there's a lot of Kung Fu influence on the system. In World War II, during the China-Burma theater, the Japanese had invaded Burma, and India and Burma had a group of jungle warfare fighters, and their name was the Gurkhas. And later, because of their fighting spirit, the British Special Forces adopted them into the British military. So it's a great honor to be a Gurkha and also to serve on the British Special Forces. Dr. G's family and uncles all served in the military and as parts of the government there. Merrill's Marauders in the 1940s freed Burma from Japanese occupation, and Dr. G brought the system to America and taught it to honor war veterans and first responders.
Ok, nos platica un poquito acerca de la historia del bando, de cómo originalmente, bueno, tiene miles de años de antigüedad y tuvo influencia de China, de Tíbet, de India, y que pues a final de cuentas en la Segunda Guerra Mundial, cuando tuvo influencia obviamente de los británicos, pero menciona principalmente cómo es que hubo influencia de los Gurkha, debido a que también el jefe de jefes de nosotros, Dr. G, todas su familia, sus tíos y demás, tuvieron que ver en la Segunda Guerra Mundial. También nos mencionó a este agrupamiento de los merodeadores de Merrill, o Merrill Marauders, que era un agrupamiento militar muy fuerte en aquella época, y pues nos comenta, bueno, todo este background militar, que a final de cuentas desembocó en Dr. G enseñando Bando en Estados Unidos en una organización no lucrativa no comercial para honrar a los caídos en batalla y a los primeros respondientes y bueno, pues como un sistema de servicio que va más allá de la parte deportiva, sino que va más allá a la parte de apoyar a estas entidades. Okay, thank you so much. Also, I remember we were discussing yesterday about the use of fire weapons within Bando and also in your experience. So can you tell us a little bit of that, the history behind that?
Well, originally, when Bando was brought to the United States by Dr. G, he worked with the Washington University and the American University in Washington, D.C. He was a linguist. Dr. G speaks as many as 7 different languages. He writes in 5 that I know of. And he started training personnel in Washington and the Baltimore area in the late 1950s, early 60s. So that's where Bando was established first in the United States. Firearms, of course, was part of the combat system for soldiers, military, and law enforcement. So that at one point had been part of the training. Past 20 years, we've gotten away from firearms training because it's so easily prolific within communities of America. Everybody has a firearm. A lot of people train themselves. A lot of people go to training, take concealed carry classes, and that was the foundation with Bando as far as firearms.
Ok, le preguntaba acerca de la relación de armas de fuego dentro de Bando y comenta que efectivamente al principio cuando Dr. G trajo esto a Estados Unidos a finales de los 50, principios de los 60, era parte del entrenamiento, el uso de armas de fuego. Sin embargo, desde hace ya más de 20 años que esto ya se ha ido alejando debido a que en Estados Unidos pues, prácticamente todo el mundo tiene un arma y todo el mundo tiene acceso a diferentes espacios donde aprender, pero que sí, efectivamente, pues es una de las partes que Bando enseña y promueve debido a que es un sistema principalmente, al menos nuestra rama, militar. I should ask, because your resume is so amazing, can you tell us maybe one or two of the things that you would like highlight on your history as a government official?
Well, most of my adult life has been in security and law enforcement and training. Of course, I've trained martial arts and I was police academy commander and trainer in the state of Ohio for many years. I taught college. I taught secondary school as well. And when the war in Iraq broke out, there was a need for law enforcement and military personnel who could train Iraqi military. And in my civilian life, I've trained many SEALs, forces, that joined the military, bonded practitioners, or who had gone out extra training after they retired from the military. So I was more or less recruited to work for the Department of Justice under contract with ISITAP. ISITAP is the International Civilian Police Training Teams. And the personnel who have expertise such as myself, we go all over the world under that organization and train democratic policing throughout the world.
Ok, le pregunté acerca de su historia como agente de gobierno y cómo es que empezó a involucrarse en todo esto de la guerra en Irak y demás, y nos comenta que hay una organización por la cual él ha viajado a diferentes países y en donde ha tenido la oportunidad de entrenar a diferentes personas. En particular tuvo oportunidad de apoyar a la gente en Irak y pues fueron, según tengo entendido, una buena cantidad de personas y de tiempo el que estuvo por allá. I remember that you said something very interesting yesterday about how Iraqis believe some of the things we watch on movies and they expect something like that. So can you tell us a little bit of that, please?
Well, in third world countries, people don't have access to information. One of the basic arts of warfare is the spread and access to information. Information and disinformation are critical tools in warfare, and it's used, has been used for centuries. A lot of the Iraqi people, they don't have a lot of education. The majority of them are just villagers who look like dogs and make ends meet. Not everyone behind a tree in Iraq or Afghanistan is a terrorist. In fact, the vast majority are just hardworking village people who are trying to make it through the day and family.
Le estaba preguntando acerca de cómo algunas personas en Irak, cuando le estuve entrenando a la policía y a algunos militares por allá, ellos esperaban ver cosas como en películas de John Wick y esas cosas. Y él comentaba de que pues en estos países la gente no tiene a veces el acceso a la información, que en otros países sí tenemos, y pues debido a eso muchos esperaban o creían que eso era real, y pues era pues enseñarles desde cero, ¿no? Desde qué es real y qué no es real, y la información y la desinformación que existe en los medios. Okay, also I remember that we discussed a little bit about psychological combat and all the PTSD and all that subject in general. Can you tell us about your experience with that and also, anything on that subject, please?
Well, there's different types of warfare that are deployed in any given situation. Psychological warfare is certainly one of them. One of the things I've learned from having spent nearly 4 years in the Middle East in a combat zone was that very few people come back unscathed. Everybody who is exposed to combat, not just being in theater. A lot of people were in theater. They never left the base. They never saw combat. But anyone who was working in the military or some of these government contracting agencies who engaged in actual combat, whether it be hand to hand, door to door, in public mission, they're going to have some high stress level. They're going to have traumatic stress. As a police officer, we are exposed to a lot of violence and death and horrible things that happen through domestic violence, car accidents, fires, shootings, violent homicide. So as a police officer, you're exposed to a lot more of that. In the military, the majority of the military personnel are just young men. They're 18 years old, 19, 20, 21. They join the military, either try and get an education, have a career choice, and come out and get a job. So they're just boys, really, and young ladies. And when they're exposed to an ambush where half their squad is killed, and, it's going to traumatize their lives. Myself, I've seen several horrible things, and it took me about 2 years to decompress from some of the things that I had seen. And I've been through a lot before I ever went to a war zone. So it's a traumatic experience.
Ok, bueno, le pregunté acerca del combate psicológico y del estrés postraumático y todo eso y cómo afecta, y comenta pues lo que ya muchos sabemos de que es algo realmente muy complicado porque la gente está expuesta a mucha muerte, accidentes y pues mucha violencia. Él estuvo lidiando por 30 años para más o menos controlarlo, ahora ya se encuentra mucho mejor, pero pues es un tema bastante fuerte y que se tiene que tocar debido a que pues a final de cuentas si no estás bien mentalmente pues difícilmente vas a poder realizar tus actividades. Y pues bueno, que la mayoría de los militares que realmente van a la guerra son chavos, son jóvenes de 22 años y pues también eso afecta muchísimo el estrés que llegan a recibir porque pues todavía son bastante jóvenes y obviamente el impacto es mucho más dramático en las mentes de personas más jóvenes. So, for how long were you active? And when did you decide to quit or to retire?
Well, I started working for the government and as a contractor in early 2005. I was recruited because of my teaching experience to the advanced police training at the Adnan Palace, which was inside the Green Zone. Because of my security background, I did the election training for the first democratic elections in Iraq, and I stayed there till late 2008, a little more than 3.5 years. And I only left because I had gotten injured during the rocket mortar attack on the embassy. And I had injured my neck really bad, and my knee. Didn't really realize how bad it was until I got home, and they wouldn't let me go back. So that was the end of that.
Okay. Le pregunté acerca de cuándo empezó a trabajar para el gobierno. Comenta que el gobierno lo buscó debido a su experiencia en seguridad como policía y que ya había tenido diferentes aproximaciones con ellos y que estuvo 3 años y medio trabajando en la embajada de Irak y apoyando en seguridad, en la seguridad del país por allá en general, pero que no duró más porque hubo un ataque en la embajada en donde tuvo pues lesiones en el cuello y en la rodilla y pues ya no pudo continuar debido a ese ataque a la embajada. I would like you to tell us a little bit of how Bando impact your life and why did you decide to focus on Bando, because I know that you practice other martial arts and I would like to know why Bando above the other ones.
How I got into Bando, and my father introduced me to martial arts. He was a black belt in judo, which he earned in Japan under Japanese masters. He brought that back to the United States when I was born. He started kind of coaching me a little bit on protocols and subject matter with judos and throws, and that was my first introduction, which I really enjoyed. In the early 70s, I got involved in Go-Jiro karate. And Go-Jiro is first karate in the world, but it was started through China and brought to Okinawa, and from Okinawa it spread and became karate. Before that it was called empty hand. Kara means emptiness, te means hand. So before it got the name of Go-Jiro or Shotokan or Shido-Ryu or any of the martial arts out of Japan and Okinawa, they were named after the hand of the city that they trained in, whether it was Naha or Shuri, call it Nahate, the hand of Naha, or the hand of Shuri. Coincidentally, some of the best Bando Grand Masters, including Dr. G himself, trained in the Go-Jiro karate systems in Japan and in Okinawa. And they United States and pass that knowledge on to a lot of people in the 50s, and Go-Jiro has a strong foundation throughout the world today, and Mexico especially.
Ok, le pregunta acerca de su historia como artista marcial y nos comenta que su papá era judoka, que practicó en Japón y que también pues tiene mucha influencia del karate, principalmente del Goju-Ryu, debido a que muchísimos maestros en Bando vinieron también de esa línea, incluyendo el mismísimo Dr. G, que tuvo la oportunidad de practicar el sistema en Okinawa y en Japón. Y bueno, pues son las raíces principales o las primeras con las que él empezó.
So when the late 80s, early 90s, I was getting my first black belt, and I had trained earlier, but I had gotten involved in other sports such as weight training and police work, and it kind of took me out of the martial arts world for a few years. In my early 30s, I picked it back up and started training again, and I got my black belt in Go-Jiro, but I wanted to go further than that. So I had to go to see my teacher's teacher, who was now a Bando Grandmaster and a Go-Jiro Grandmaster, Chet Buffington. And Chet Buffington had stopped practicing Go-Jiro because a lot of guys in that area of Wheeling, West Virginia, and Steubenville, they had went to a university college where Dr. G had eventually ended up as a professor there. And they were introduced to Dr. G and introduced to Bando, and all the good guys kind of brought their students along with them. And it took them a few years to get me to cross over, but eventually I was drafted, if you will, into the Bando system, and I've been in Bando ever since. I'm 30 years now.
Ok, y comenta que su maestro de Goju-Ryu, de hecho, pues él también empezó a practicar Bando y que de hecho dejó el sistema para enfocarse en Bando, y es debido a eso a que pues él hizo lo mismo, empezó a practicar Bando con este maestro y pues bueno, le encantó, le gustó mucho, y por eso es que se dedicó ya 30 años perfeccionándolo. Would you say that Bando help you develop more, or help you in some way your?
Yeah, I mean, learning any martial arts is like any other athletic sport. There's a lot of people that play baseball or football or soccer. There's a lot of people who practice martial arts, but there's different skill levels throughout martial arts, just like there's different skill levels in football. Being a black belt in a martial arts, I equate to being, say, a starter on a football team in high school. There's a lot of guys who are good high school players that never make it to college because they're just not that good. And then there's a lot of guys that do go to college, and maybe that's your second degree, maybe that's your third degree. And then there's the higher levels, like professional football. So of all the practitioners in the world that train martial arts, less than 3% of those practitioners ever make it to black belt. So to make it to the next level, which is the second and third degrees, less than 1% of that 3% ever make it. So it's a lifelong journey. It's something that it's not a hobby. To get to that level, you have to make it a lifestyle. And I've practiced it and lived by it my whole life, and it's helped me get through some rough times, mentally, physically, emotionally. So, that's how I got introduced to Bando, was through Jayjohn.
Pues mira, nos confirma que sí, entrenó Bando después de gracias a su maestro de Goju, y que pues Bando y que las artes marciales en general se difieren de otras disciplinas deportivas debido a que debe ser como una forma de vida para realmente poderte destacar o llegar a un buen nivel, debido a que de todas las personas que practican artes marciales normalmente el 3% es quien llega realmente a un buen nivel, a cinta negra, vamos a decir, y dentro de esas cintas negras pues todavía hay un porcentaje mucho menor que logra traspasar esa barrera, y pues por eso es que lo hace como una forma de vida. Y bueno, pues lo ha formado, lo ha ayudado en lo mental, en lo espiritual, en lo físico, y que es una de las principales cosas que él mantiene dentro de su vida. Okay, I'm trying to remember some of the stuff that we discussed yesterday, so let me remember. I remember that you said something very interesting about how when you were in Iraq, I believe, you said something like, of the 100% of the people that are there, only 10% are the ones that are like fighting, and the other 90% are the ones that help those 10% to...
Let me put it to you like this. In America, there are gangs, motorcycle gangs, and they're called 1%ers. And what that means is 1% of all the people who ride motorcycles are bad boys, members of biker gangs, like the Hells Angels and some of the others. Same thing with terrorists and freedom fighters. One man's terrorist is another man's freedom fighter. So anyone fighting against the United States or the coalition forces, by many are deemed fighting for the freedoms of their religion and their land. But the population, only about 1% of that population are causing 100% problems. One well-trained fighter or terrorist can cause destruction, madness, and mayhem to make it look like the whole country's involved. So there may be several hundred known violent extremists, and they may have several hundred more in the background that they're developing to fight in their jihad, which is their holy war. But the vast majority of people are just good, hard-working people who want to raise their families. I've had an interpreter. His entire life dream was to own a car. He worked in the Middle East. And not a new car, a $300, didn't have any tread on the tire car. That was his dream. So we take things for granted in America, and other well.
Ok, nos platica acerca de cómo, en la última ocasión que tuvimos la oportunidad de platicar, me comentaba de que del 100% de personas que van a la guerra, realmente el 90% está para poder apoyar a ese 10% a estar en activos, ¿no? Pero él continuó comentando ahorita en esta ocasión algo muy interesante, debido a que muchas veces realmente el 1% de los grupos de las personas que pertenecen a grupos de bandas o lo que sea hacen que parezca que son el 100%. Es decir, él comentaba que hay diferentes organizaciones y bandas en Estados Unidos que son consideradas como negativas, cuando en realidad solamente es el 1% el que hace cosas malas y los demás pues se llevan la mala fama. Lo mismo pasaba en Irak, que las personas realmente son muy buenas, pero ese 1% hace que los demás se vean como malos, y eso hay que tener cuidado porque luego nos dejamos llevar por el 1% y creemos que todos son así. Y también comentaba acerca de una persona que conoció que su mayor sueño era tener un carro, y un carro bastante barato, y ese era su sueño, la razón por la que él vivía. Y pues muchas veces nos damos las cosas por garantía cuando en realidad no nos damos cuenta de lo que tenemos. Entonces pues pone muy bien las cosas en contexto, ¿no? De cómo muchas veces por la mala información o por no ponernos a pensar un poco más, nos confundimos y creamos criterios muy equivocados. Also, I'm really trying to remember some of the things that we discussed yesterday, because I was so amazed about everything you said. So right now, I would like you to talk a little bit of Dr. G. Tell us a little bit of him and who is him for you.
Well, I first met Dr. G, of course, through Chet Buffington, and I had been a Goju practitioner. Dr. G had also been a Goju practitioner and had trained with Gogan Yamaguchi in Japan. So he was a big lover of karate. He had trained in India and the Far East. He had trained in Burma, and there are many Bando practitioners and Muay Thai practitioners in Burma, which is called Lithway, and in Thailand it's called Muay Thai. After having met Dr. G, I was introduced to him again by Grandmaster Chet Buffington, and a friend of mine named Mark Simonson, who's also a high master Siaji and a kickboxing champion, started bringing me in to train with Dr. G's highest student. And I learned more training with Dr. G in, say, 3 years than I learned in probably a decade of training Goju, because the knowledge wasn't there. Dr. G's knowledge of martial arts, he's a martial arts genius. His skill set and his ability to teach and perform, and the photographic memory that he possesses to retain all this knowledge is beyond belief.
Ok, nos comenta que la primera vez que conoció a Dr. G fue precisamente por su maestro y también por otro amigo en común que tenemos que se llama Mark Simonson, que es un maestro de bando, de arma y de kickboxing, y que, pues cuando conoció a Dr. G se quedó impresionado por su memoria fotográfica, por su manera de enseñar y porque pues para él es un genio. Okay, so I remember that yesterday you said something about Dr. G being something like the grandmaster of the grandmasters. Some people would confuse about it. Can you tell us why would you say something like that?
Again, it goes back to professional athletes. The percentage of guys that become pro athletes, whether it be in soccer or football, it's very, very low percentage. Same thing with MMA fighters. There probably aren't 150 pro fighters fighting in the top 10 of each weight class, in the MMA. There might be thousands trained, but to actually get into the octagon on a international and world-class level is few and far between. And of those, not many make it. So Dr. G would be considered, as history will report at some point in time, the best of the best. He admired Gogan Yamaguchi, the cat, the way I admire him. Dr. G's ability and knowledge and expertise far exceeds that of anybody we've ever watched on television. A lot of people talk about Bruce Lee, and Bruce Lee was a great practitioner, but his teacher, the IP man or Ip Man, was far beyond Bruce Lee's talent. And because he didn't sell himself to magazines and movies, people didn't know who he was. And there's martial arts practitioners in little corners of the world that are better than anyone you've ever seen or ever will see. but they're not interested in self-promotion. They train and they just have unique abilities, like few of us do. And I'm considered a pretty good martial artist in my area. One of the things that Chet used to say is, good compared to do. Well, compared to some of the local guys, I'm the best they've ever seen, but the problem is they haven't seen anybody.
Right.
So, even a guy like G, that's the top of, that's Mount Everest for a martial artist being in his shoes.
Ok, le preguntaba acerca de algo que dijo en la entrevista pasada, en donde él decía que Dr. G es como el maestro de los grandes maestros y le decía que por qué se animaba a decir algo como eso. Él comenta que, pues ha tenido la oportunidad de practicar a grandes maestros, de conocer y practicar con grandes maestros, y que Dr. G para él es como el Monte Everest, que es como lo mejor de lo mejor, que normalmente vemos a muchas personas extraordinarias en televisión, pero que hay una gran cantidad de grandes maestros que nunca conoceremos, que están en diferentes partes del mundo, que no tienen ningún interés en publicitarse, en darse a conocer, y que realmente son muy muy buenos. Y Dr. G es uno de ellos que siempre trató de mantenerse en su chamba, en sus cosas, sin buscar la fama. También mencionaba a Bruce Lee, que pues era una persona muy buena, pero que a su juicio su maestro pues era una persona igual o mejor, pero pues que no tenía el interés de comercializarse, y que por eso es que para él, en su experiencia, nunca ha habido nadie tan grande como Dr. G. De hecho, él ha entrenado a grandes maestros, y por eso es que también es conocido como tal, porque es un maestro literalmente de grandes maestros. Y básicamente es lo que comentaba. También hay una cosa que dijo la vez pasada acerca de que Bando no está a la venta, y por eso es que nunca nunca buscó comercializarlo, y era una de sus reglas. Bando no está a la venta. Ahora las cosas han ido modificando un poquito, pero eso es todo. Yo said, translating in Spanish, something that you said yesterday about Bando is not for sale.
A lot of people will never know who Dr. G is, Yulong G. Because he would never sell Bando. Bando was never for sale. A lot of the knowledge was kept secret. The kukri, for instance, was considered a secret part of the ancient system, and it wasn't to be shown in public. And if you was to look back at some of the magazines that came out in the 70s, there were some local writers who practiced Shotokan and were well known in the sports fighting arena. They were very good at what they did, which was point fighting. And, we actually had a world champion, Toki Hill, who just lives the next town over from where we are. And he trained under Don Madden. And Don Madden has trained many, many great fighters. But, Dr. G would say, you're very good at what you do, but you do not do what we do. And what Bando practitioners do was they kick the legs, the knees and elbows. We didn't use them in tree sparring because they're so dangerous. Matter of fact, speaking of MMA elbows and knees, I don't allow my students to use it. I teach it to my upper students. But a local fighter just 8 miles down the road here got his jaw broke, both sides of his jaw. I'll send you the photograph. Maybe you can put it in here.
Sure.
He caught a knee. It was his second MMA fight. And he caught a knee in the jaw, and it crushed and separated his jaw right along here. Broke it completely in half on both sides. So people have no idea that is meant to be very destructive. It's not meant for sport karate. It's meant to crush, to kill, to maim, to spike. Same thing with the knees. And but when you start talking about knees and elbows, you can be injured permanently the rest of your life. You look at some of the greatest fighters in MMA today, Conor McGregor being the latest, fighting for another world title, and he shattered the shin bone, and he'll be lucky if he ever walks right again. That can heal up, and he can fight again if he's crazy enough to do it, but why? He's already made all his money. And, his career's over. Like I said, a professional fighter's career is normally over by the time they're in their early to late 30s. And, like I say, Dr. G will never be known like Bruce Lee was because he didn't allow himself to make movies. He didn't share a lot of the knowledge to the outside world. And that's the reason why.
Ok, y nos comenta una buena cantidad de cosas. Primero que nada nos dice que debido a que Dr. G nunca tuvo el interés de comercializarlo ni nada, es probable que pues nunca sea tan conocido como otras grandes figuras. Es algo que realmente nunca le interesó. Sin embargo, pues tuvo, esto sí lo sé yo, tuvo la oportunidad de entrenar a grandes artistas marciales y practicar con una buena cantidad de los mejores artistas marciales que ustedes han visto en televisión. Pero pues él siempre se mantuvo tras bambalinas porque se dedicó a otra cosa y no le interesaba esa otra parte comercial. También nos comenta que hubo un campeón en Bando que también se involucró en la parte de combate por puntos. Era interés de Bando también tratar de tener a varios practicantes en diferentes disciplinas para pues darlo a conocer y poder practicar y aprender de todos. Pero bueno, comenta también, por ejemplo, que Dr. G le decía a las personas que eran muy buenas o muy destacadas en un estilo, pues sí, eres muy bueno en eso, pero lo que nosotros hacemos es otra cosa. Entonces, no porque tú seas muy bueno haciendo tu estilo, tu escuela, pues significa que eres bueno en lo general, ¿no? Para no hacerle el cuento largo, también empezó a platicar acerca de las artes marciales mixtas, en donde una persona que se fracturó la quijada completamente, precisamente en uno de sus primeros combates por un codazo o un rodillazo, y bueno, por eso es que él considera que es una brutalidad, pero bueno, a grandes rasgos es lo que mencionó. Disculpen si no les puedo traducir mucho, pero es que dijo varias cosas. Okay, well, I don't know if there is something else you wanted to share. This is the time. Thank you so much for all your knowledge. Thank you.
It's been a pleasure. I really appreciate your time. And for those people who don't know you, I know you as a very good practitioner and teacher, and you and Dr. Del Miner started Bando Mexico, and we hope that you continue to grow and train and enjoy the martial arts. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, and last question. Have you seen aliens?
Have I seen aliens? A lot of people don't believe in aliens. I've seen some things, and the military have released some videos of some unidentified flying objects and submersible objects. And, our military and the military in Britain, France, the USSR, and Canada have also admitted that, there's things flying around there that they don't know exactly what they are. So, that's something that's yet to be explored. I've seen 4 things in my life that I don't know what they were. I honestly don't believe we're alone in the universe, if that answers your question.
Okay, thank you so much. Le pregunté acerca de, precisamente por su experiencia con gente de alta seguridad, de inteligencia y el departamento de seguridad y todo eso, si él había visto aliens o conocía de aliens, y nos dice que pues lo que ya todo el mundo sabemos, ¿no? De que Estados Unidos ya reveló algo acerca del tema, de que varios países ya abrieron oficinas acerca del tema, y él en lo personal en 4 ocasiones ha visto cosas que no sabe qué son, pero bueno, pues que no va a decir más allá de eso. En la entrevista pasada dijo que no tenía el permiso para hablar, pero bueno, eso ya no saldrá en esta ocasión. Well, okay, Sayahi, thank you so much for the opportunity. I hope we can talk very soon.
Yes, sir. Thanks a lot. Goodbye.
Thank you. Have a great night.